Hello all, good evening and welcome to today's session. So am I audible to all?
Yeah, good evening, ma'am. You are audible, ma'am.
Okay, so today we are going to kind of go through the activity sessions, the questions that we have in the activity for our week 8. So before we get started, just wanted to know how many of you have gone through the topics for week 8? Okay, I do see a few hands raised. Okay, great. So three of you. So you've gone through the entire thing? Okay, good. Yeah. So in week 8, if you would have at least had a glance at the topics, it's kind of like basically to uh, know it give you an overall understanding about app development, like apart from what we are doing, which is on Vue.js, what are all the other good practices that we should keep in mind when we are developing our API, or what are the other good things that we need to know, what's happening in the whole ecosystem, or what are the technologies that are predominantly playing out there today. So it's more overall to give a better understanding of the whole app development ecosystem, right? Um, so, before we get started with the activity questions, uh, we'll just try to see what is it? I mean, when we talk about application development, what do you think are the main components that come into play? Anyone, please? So when we are talking about application development on a whole, right? What is it that comes to your mind? I'll share my screen as well so that we can draw it out, have a discussion before we dive into the questions maybe. Okay, so is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So now, yeah, just to get you all started, right? So we have a client. So on a client side uh, is what we are doing currently, right? Our Vue.js and um, all our browser or any other browser kind of setting. So we got a client out here. So what else comes in when we are talking about application development? Who does the client interact with?
Can you make the question a little more clear?
Like see, we have a client, right? So to get any information, so when we're talking about the app development kind of thing, uh,
Okay. So we
we
can say
yeah,
client first connect with the server if
perfect, right? So it's essentially a kind of like client and server,
yeah,
and then
if
how do we communicate between the two?
uh, between the HTTP network.
Perfect, right? So we need to have some means by which this client should be able to communicate with the server, and vice versa, the server should be able to respond back to our client.
Yeah,
And how do we essentially do this?
using response.
Okay, so
If there is a data required, then we have to make another connection from server to the database.
okay, yeah. So you're talking about your backend and wherein your database sits, right?
Yes, yes.
So I'll just consider that as a single entity. I'll just call that whole thing as a server for now. Okay, so the server essentially, of course, as you said, it does have to communicate with your database out here. So let's just consider this whole ecosystem as a server end over here. Um, So essentially, what would happen that the client sends in a request to our server, and the server has to respond back to that request. And how do we essentially do that? This communication.
Again, through the HTTP and through the response from the server side.
Perfect. Right. So, what we have been using out here is APIs, and APIs in turn have to kind of like use the HTTP to do the same, right? So,
Yes.
HTTP API, we can think of it like a messenger, right? Which kind of like takes the request from the client to the server and then gets back a response from the server back to the client. Now, when we are talking of APIs, right? So, if you have gone through the videos, we are talking about a number of good points or things to keep in mind while we are kind of like communicating or we are designing these APIs. So, because the API is, when we are developing an API, for whom are we developing this API essentially? Who is going to make use of those APIs?
Actually, client is going to use this.
Yeah. And when we are talking of client, it's going to be the developer of this client, right? Because when we are working on huge projects, essentially, the client side development and the server side development goes on independently, right? And we need to have some means by which finally the client needs to communicate with the server. And what we noticed, like if you recollect your MAD one, I think we were talking about it over there, right? It is very much essential that a proper documentation is meant in terms of the API as to what the server is capable of returning back, how the client can communicate with the server to get the details that they want. So that part of the documentation is very much essential because let's say the client side, as I said, right, the client side development and the server side development can kind of like go on simultaneously and pretty much independent of each other. But at the end of it, we do require that when the client is kind of like communicating with the server, they need to know how they can communicate with the server, and that's where the APIs come into picture. So when you are designing your APIs, like what is the kind of request that they can send, what's the kind of endpoints that they need to kind of like communicate on so that they can get back the response. So there are certain not essentially hard and fast rules, but some good conventions that needs to be kept in mind, right? Now, anyone would want to kind of like throw some light into this? Like, what do you think the conventions should be, or what is it that we need to kind of like keep in mind?
There is a
REST APIs.
Can you just be a little louder? I didn't get you.
Ma'am, REST framework.
Yes. So essentially, we have our REST framework, right? So it is an architectural style of networking, not essentially meant for APIs, but yeah, it has come to a point that okay, when API follows all the conventions that are associated with the REST architecture, we call it as a RESTful API, right? So what does this representational state transfer, what does it state? What are the few things that it takes into consideration?
ma'am. One question. I have a doubt here.
Yes,
Can
please.
I raise this? Okay.
Yeah.
Uh, So whenever okay, one convention is the REST is there already. So through the REST, we are using the API. I was thinking, suppose on the server, we simply write the function. In general, we write that for the, and we Jinja we connect template. So whenever we write one function, which is the pass the some data to the template and then we render to the client. If instead of passing the template, uh, if I pass that through that website itself, the JSON file, the JSON data, can we say that we can render on the client side as the API format?
Okay, I didn't get your question totally, but what I get of it is that you're saying that, you do not want to follow the REST protocol as such, but I mean, you're directly going ahead and communicating with your server, and the server is able to communicate back with you, right?
Correct. Correct. And the server is responding, and the response is going not in the form of the template directly, but it's going in the form of the JSON format. So whenever we sending the template in the whenever the render in the any function, whenever we call that any URL, in the response we send the some render template. So we send the some dictionary data and the Jinja manipulate the dictionary and the display the entire thing. So instead of making the Jinja and remove the Jinja and directly on the client side, I can send that entirely JSON itself. So
Okay.
in the lecture, yes.
So what's your question? Like, can it be done, or is it a correct way of doing, or what is it?
Yeah, can we do this instead of the REST API?
Now, see, I mean, the thing about APIs is one thing, why this topic is given or why this lecture was first of all put up. I mean, if you look at the whole content of week 8, is because, to give you an idea that it's very necessary to follow conventions. Okay. So, when we are talking about a client side developer, right? So, it might be that the developer has worked on previous APIs as well. And when we are saying that, okay, we need to connect to a server, I mean, it's always to make things easy for the person who is using it, right? So when we develop an app, what should be our foremost idea that we have in mind? That the app needs to be, really easy to use for the end user, right? I mean, whoever is making use of our app, they shouldn't feel confused when they're having a look at our app. So the kind of icons that we give, the kind of annotations that we give in the front end of our app, it should be kind of like easily understandable to the end user. So likewise, when we are trying to create these APIs, or we're trying to kind of like put up a standard as to how this communication needs to be there, we have to kind of like understand that there is going to be a developer on the client side who's going to make use of this. And it's very important to follow these standards. That kind of like makes life easy for everyone, the one who is designing the APIs, and as also the person who's trying to make use of those APIs and try to use it in their code, right? So just to give you an example, right? Just the way that when we are writing an address, how do we write the address? We start off with the house number, then probably the apartment number, then the street, then we go to the city, state, and finally the country, right? And the pin code. But I mean, let's say someone else is that, okay, I don't want to write it that way. I want to go in the other approach, right? I want to go give the country name first and all. And if someone hasn't exactly heard of that country, right? So when this thing goes to a post office and the postman has to deliver it, it will be really difficult for that person to kind of like understand that address, right? So all that is, because we are used to a convention as to how the address is written, and it kind of like gets posted in that way. So, this whole thing is that we have to keep in mind some conventions when we are kind of like giving those API names and those API declarations that we are giving out. Got the point? It's nothing that it cannot be done or cannot be done, but it's always good to have a certain convention which can be followed and which makes things easier for everyone. Does it make sense? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible.
Hello, ma'am.
Okay, so does that answer your question?
Yeah, actually, last moment I lost the connection.
Okay. Uh,
Yeah,
so essentially, what I was saying, yes, I mean, it's important for us to kind of like follow certain conventions. So there is no hard and fast rule that when we are creating an API, the endpoint should look in a certain manner. Let's say we want to fetch something from a given student and course kind of thing, right? So we give the URL, then let's say you want to kind of like go ahead and fetch the students, and let's say a particular student. So you either kind of like pass the ID, or if we give something like roll number one or so. But if we try to kind of like change the convention, we try to say, okay, I don't want to give it that way. I want to give a underscore one or a one underscore something. So I mean, although I mean it becomes a little tedious for the developer. They might be used to a certain convention, the way that things are given, but when we try to deviate from that, I mean, it's not a good practice. Okay, so no hard and fast rule that it cannot work, it won't work, or it's not doable. It's not about that, but it's about following some conventions so that things can kind of like the development can move on smoothly from either side. Okay. Okay. So having said that, let's
Hello,
just try.
Sanjita. Shall
Yeah.
I just add a few more points?
Yeah. Sure. Sure.
Okay. So yeah, Kumar, just a simple question to you. Suppose you are a website user and suppose you are being presented the content in the form of JSON instead of HTML. How would it feel to you?
pardon, sir.
Yeah, suppose you are a website user, you are using a
Yes.
particular website and
Yes.
let's say you requested some information from that website
Correct.
by performing certain actions. Now,
Yes.
suppose the server in return just responds with a JSON response
Okay.
instead of HTML. How would it look to you?
Oh, so actually my question was there. So suppose sometime actually my question was related to the view. I was thinking, okay, it is responding as the JSON, and through the JavaScript, I'm converting in the HTML. That my point was that.
Okay, yeah.
So through the JavaScript, I am designing the complete the HTML instead of the template like that. Jinja is rendering on the server side.
Of
Everything
course,
is
this is what you are doing in Vue, right? You are creating the whole front end using JavaScript only.
yeah. So that's the question I wanted to know that. So suppose earlier we already developed some particular design in the backend,
Okay.
and the REST API has the completely different pattern. So suppose already the website is developed. So instead of remodifying and creating the new API, so if whatever the function is returning, I'm just using in the view that particular link, and that particular link is in the response instead of the HTML, it is sending the JSON, and we can utilize that particular JSON in the view. That my point was like that.
Yeah, of course, means we have been doing it all along, right? In this course.
Yes.
So I am still not able to, quite understand what your actual question is, because if this was your question, so I guess the answer is straightforward. We have been doing it all along in the course itself. We are getting the JSON response from the server and using it the way we want to render it on the front end.
Okay, so we are getting the JSON through the API, and
Okay.
my question was there already predefined the function we already made that. So can we call that particular URL and we can take that particular URL in the JSON format instead of rendering that HTML? So what will happen? I don't have to remodify the backend website. Just I will change the URL and I will call particular
Yeah,
URL
so
and that.
why do you need to change the implementation of your API? The API will still work the same way it used to work previously. You just need to change the implementation that you have written for the front end.
Okay. So if I don't made that particular API, So instead of making API, I can utilize that particular function. So it is not a good practice, or it was the good practice to, that's I was confirming.
Which function?
That suppose there is a one URL is there. Suppose two URL is there,
Okay.
and earlier it was rendering that HTML. Now
Okay.
I didn't make any particular REST API. Just
Okay.
I'm utilizing only that to function to send the JSON, and the retrieving that particular JSON on the HTML side or client side, and the converting through the JavaScript in the HTML phase.
Okay. So, well, if I get your question correctly, what you are saying, you are basically referring to a Flask app, which is also serving an API. Is it correct?
Yes. So I didn't design the particular REST API for that particular website. Just already the website was there. I, instead of sending the HTML, I'm just sending that JSON.
Okay. You just
For
want to send back the JSON.
correct.
Uh,
So that is the API. So what
that itself becomes API. Yeah.
API is something which you build for the application to use, not for the end user. I mean, the end user is itself a program.
Okay.
So if you are sending the JSON, it means that you are going to use that data to like build some kind of interface. So that is the definition of API. So it is already an API.
Sir, that is what we were taught in the weather app that's are implemented in live session. We were taking API from weatherapi.com, and we were just plugging in the values.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what means we are trying to explain that. Yeah, we are getting the JSON response somewhere using APIs or from the server, whatever it is. Doesn't matter if you are using pre-made APIs or even if it's your developed API. We are just using its response in order to render it on the front end. Now, the way we render it, it completely depends on our implementation. We can change it anytime we want.
Yeah, you think about the API as 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 something which an application will consume, not the end user. I mean, end user. I mean, user can also consume, but it's meant for the for some application.
Okay.
Yeah. So just for an instance, the GitHub, right? So of course, you know that GitHub is of course, a web application, but it also provides an API. But many few people use that API, and those who use that API, they just use it for some experimentation purpose. Right? All of the other people mainly use the HTML part of it, the web application part of it. Many few of them use the API part of it. Right? It is also available with the API subdomain, api.github.com. You should be able to access. Yeah, is that okay?
Oh yes, sir. It's okay.
Okay. Yeah, maybe you can come back to us again if still there is any ambiguity or you are not able to get something.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not like something. It's not like mathematics that there is a definition that it should follow this rule. Then we will call it API. API is something which is meant for the program. That's it. So if you are sending the data, then you are creating an API because you are assuming that some program will consume this data. And and generally the format of the data will something which a program can easily parse. Like if you think about, if you see the JSON can be parsed in the Python dictionary or JavaScript object.
Yes, sir. Mostly part is clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sanjita, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, you can go ahead, please.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so Kumar, I hope that clears your doubt, right? I mean, this is essentially how we kind of like call an API, right? So that API might be sitting on your Flask server. It might be a already ready-made API, as Abhishek was telling, right? I mean, the GitHub API. So if I just use the Postman and just try to get the API, I go kind of like give a GET request to api.github.com/users. So it kind of like gives us a response with all the users that it has, right? And if you look at those individual users, we see that these individual users, it's trying to send out the login, the ID, the avatar, and all these things associated for the particular user, right? So this is how GitHub has internally, I mean, the API is kind of like storing the things in key value pairs, as you said, in JSON format. We have things out here. And it's up to us as to how we make use of this particular thing in our application, correct? So, I mean, in your application, after you get that data back, now how you want to make use of data is absolutely up to you. Whether you want to kind of like consume all the data that that particular GET request is giving you, or you just want to kind of like consume parts of the data, just the name that you require out of it, it's totally up to you, right? Okay, so now having just got the basic understanding, let's just try to kind of like look at the few of the activity questions that we had related to this topic. Okay. Okay, so there we go with the first question. Which of the following header fields is used to specify which content type the client is able to understand while making an API request? So, anyone? What do you think is the correct answer for this?
Is it accept?
Yeah, perfect. It's accept. Right. So through the accept header, we try to say that, okay, these are the particular content types that is kind of like acceptable to the client. Okay, great. And content type, you know, right? I mean, this one kind of like tells us what's the format in which we want to kind of like send across our body. Usually what we use is a JSON. So we write application/JSON. So it could be JSON, it could be XML and so on. Okay, so now moving on to our next question. This is a fairly easy one. So which of the following says the difference between a patch and a put HTTP request in conventions? So what are the available methods that we have? The main methods?
Ma'am, get, post,
Yeah,
and put and delete.
perfect, right? So it goes according to your current. So create, that's post, your read, that is get, and of course update, we can update it via output or a patch, and finally delete, which is the delete method. Now coming to patch, so we do also have this method as patch. So what is the difference between a patch and a put? So is it that there is no difference between them, or which of these do you think is true? With put, the entire resource gets updated, whereas in patch, only the necessary fields are updated. With patch, the entire resource is updated, whereas in put, only the necessary fields are updated. And none of the above. Which one do you think is the correct one?
Yes, ma'am. Put update, ma'am, the entire resources,
Perfect.
whereas the
Perfect.
patch only the written one. That is one to
Great.
update.
Great. Great. So that's essentially the difference between the two. So put kind of like replaces the total entire resource, but patch kind of like goes ahead and updates only those necessary fields that are required. Okay, now finally coming to our next question. So what are the points to keep in mind while developing an API, right? So when we are talking about developing an API, we have to keep in mind that it's for the developer, the client-side developer, that we are kind of like writing or developing these APIs. So with that in mind, what do you think are the things that we need to keep in mind? That the API is created so that it can be used by others to connect to a remote server. It's a good practice to have data URLs with an entity-based approach. It is a good practice to follow conventions, which makes it easy for the developers to understand and use the API. And finally, it is not necessary to maintain uniformity. So it's a multiple choice thing. So which of these do you think is the correct options? Which are the correct options?
Ma'am, first three.
Okay, great.
Ma'am, first and third means is clear. Ma'am, second entity-based approach, ma'am, I'm not getting it.
Okay. So third one you are saying, right? It has to be option. Okay, now coming to entity-based approach. So let's say we go back to the example of student and courses, right? So over there, student is an entity, right? So with your student, you have your associated, the name of the student, the courses he has taken, maybe the date of joining of that student, and so on. So student is an entity over there. And likewise, course is another entity. So when we are essentially kind of like dealing with a server side or this APIs, so how do we tend to do it? Like we were seeing this particular example. I think I looked that up. Okay, so when we were trying, we see that whenever we want some students, or let's say we have a database or a server which can give us details about books, the authors about the books. So I mean, we kind of like tend to think in terms of entities, right? So that makes life easier, uh, both for the client to kind of like understand, okay, this is what he wants to fetch and what are the information that they would want to fetch from that. And likewise for the server as well, right? So they are kind of like the way essentially those tables are maintained and all. So you get the idea of entity, right?
Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so is it a good practice for the URLs to also follow entity-based approach? Basically, those endpoints that you're thinking of,
Yes, ma'am.
right? So this is also a option that we have to keep in mind, right? Okay, great. Okay, so I think we are done with 8.1. So 8.2 is again an extension of designing APIs. So let's just have a look at those questions as well. Okay, now we were talking about REST APIs, right? So which of the following are the limitations of REST API? So when we are, I mean, till now what we saw, right? I mean, the basic approach till now in order to kind of like connect with the server is using APIs, and what we mainly tend to use is RESTful APIs. So, I mean, obviously there might be some problems with that approach as well. So what do you think? What are the challenges that we face when we are using a RESTful API? So your first option is construction of complex queries, requires client-side handling. When data is from multiple data sources, the fusion of data becomes an issue. Then use of standard HTTP procedure calls, lack of state.
Yes, ma'am. First
So
option is correct, ma'am. Ma'am, fetching the data with respect to the various uh, uh, means various we have dependencies will be difficult. Like in the student table, first 10 a student with that mark with greater than some marks will be difficult.
exactly, exactly. Right. So when it comes to kind of like handling complex queries, So essentially what we see is that sometimes we do see a overfetch of data, right? So we might be wanting just the marks of students, or as you gave an example, the marks of students above a certain kind of grade. So we kind of like all those complex queries cannot be done directly. We still have to go to the endpoint, fetch the entire data, and probably do some kind of handling at the client side. So of course, that's one of our limitations. What else?
Ma'am, B option.
Okay, perfect. So if we have to kind of like make multiple, I mean, we need some data from multiple data sources. So that also kind of like requires that all those processing and calls has to be done from the client side. We do not have to a single server and get things done. Great. So A and B. Anything else? Use of standard HTTP procedure calls, obviously that's an advantage, right? So we all are, I mean, it's good to kind of like stick to those HTTP procedure calls. And of course, a lack of state is also a good thing, right? So the servers need not be aware of the state that the client is in. So that's not at all a limitation. So A and B is what we can call as the limitations of our RESTful APIs. Okay, now coming to the next question. Which of the below describes JSX? That is your JavaScript XML. So all of you must have heard of this, right? JSX.
Ma'am, B option is right.
Okay. So JSX is essentially a templating language, and yes, it is mainly used with React and React Native. Any other of the options? And yes,
Yes,
of
ma'am.
course, it is an extension, right? It is a syntax extension of JavaScript itself. So option A is also correct. And if any of you have actually used JSX or have tried to look at a few codes with React, you would have noticed that it's possible to go ahead and write JavaScript expressions directly within our JSX tags. Okay, so this is another point which actually makes it a kind of like a really nice, strong templating language. So we wouldn't just call it a simple templating language. I mean, we can directly go ahead and write our JavaScript queries within the JSX. So, I mean, that's another option. So, both your A, B, and D would be your correct options for that. Okay. Now, okay, this should be an easy one. So, which of the following is our common methods of API authentication? So, what's the answer?
All three, ma'am. All of them.
Perfect. Right. So, all the above is the correct answer. And yeah. So now, as we saw in this, right, these set of questions. So what is coming out that probably REST API also does have some limitations, right? So this is where the whole thing about GraphQL and people wanting some other mechanism which kind of like makes it easier to make these requests to the server and to kind of like make it more efficient in a way as well. So that is where our GraphQL comes into picture. Now, any of you who have gone through the videos, can you just kind of like give a gist as to what is it that you understood about GraphQL? Yes, anyone?
Ma'am, ma'am,
Yeah.
using GraphQL, you can request just the data that you want, but it's more than just hitting the endpoint. You also have to request the template in which the data you want. So I can get, like, if I just want marks of some students of some class, then I can request in that format.
Okay, perfect, perfect. So, what we were seeing with REST APIs is that, I mean, of course, it had an entity-based approach, which is good, but at the same time, the number of endpoints, right, that we had to query. So, let's say, as you said, like if you just want the marks of the students, but still, if that endpoint is not exposed to us, probably we would have to kind of like make a fetch of the total student data, and then we have to handle that query on the client side to just get the information that we want. Or let's say that we want information that is sitting out there on multiple from multiple data sources. So in that case also, I mean, it's the client who had to handle that part. Okay. So with GraphQL, all those challenges are, it kind of like addresses those challenges. One is that we do not have to overfetch or underfetch data the way that it is or is typically done with a REST API kind of thing. And at the same time, it also makes it possible for us to kind of like go ahead and get data from multiple backends. And that query handling or that kind of like finally getting the output of the data is left to the GraphQL server, right? So the GraphQL server, we can kind of like think of it as a layer upon the server, which kind of like does all these things for us. And it makes thing easier. It's a query language, as the name suggests, right? It's a query language, and the fetching of the data and the quantity and the exact data that we want, it makes it much more easier to get that data using GraphQL. Okay.
Ma'am, if I can just like add a simple question that is not entirely related to the course, but on GraphQL.
Okay.
Why it is so costly to run GraphQL in production? I can also add the background to it. Then I read a report from Dream 11 team, in which they, like, it was a long blog, but they mentioned that GraphQL was probably the highest computing resource that they had to spend.
Okay.
If you want, I can just post the link to that. But it's not, you will not be able to read that now, but it's an interesting read.
Okay, sure. You could share the link and probably we'll have a look. Abhishek or Narendra, any answers to this in terms of, I mean, the computational part? Or you're talking about expensive in terms of computational.
Yeah, my question was simple: that why it is so means expensive to run GraphQL at scale.
Don't have the like clear answer, but I guess it should be because it adds an extra layer to like your application.
Sir, I was talking in terms of cost. Like, it's fine that it adds
Computational
an
cost,
extra.
I understand that the you are saying that using REST API might be like not that expensive in terms of computation.
I just pasted the link to the blog. If you can have a look and answer me at the end of this session, that would be fine too.
Okay, okay. Fine.
Okay, so yeah, so we'll have a look at that. So probably we'll answer you now, or we might answer it after the session as well. Okay, so now coming back to our GraphQL, yes, of course, as Narendra pointed out, it's a layer which sits above the server. And the good thing, of course, it can be kind of like used along with any of your other programming languages. But yes, it does require a separate GraphQL server. And at the same time, when you're using it along with your Vuex or any of your front ends, we would require something called as your GraphQL client as well, which is able to connect to the server and make those queries and requests for us on that behalf, right? And in GraphQL, again, the same approach is taken. So we essentially again try to think of things in terms of entities. Okay, so it's kind of like given each entity, you kind of like go ahead and say what is your entity uh, would look like. So we say a type, and then within that, if we have a student or we have a course, we would mention that. And so the whole schema is kind of like spelled out before, which makes it kind of like a lot more easier to use probably. And yes, as we said, the amount of data that we want to actually go ahead and fetch from it, right? So within this, we can have we would have our student, and for each of these we can kind of like go ahead and say, okay, what is the type that we want associated with each of the fields that we have within. So we can say that the ID has to be something as a int, we can say that the name has to be your string, and so on. And then we can also, while we are querying, we can kind of like go ahead and query exactly the things that we want. Okay. Now, having said that, just a brief overview probably. Let's kind of like have a look at these questions. So, which of the following is false regarding REST and GraphQL?
Ma'am, none of the above.
Yeah, none of the above. Because REST is an architectural style, GraphQL is a query language, and REST, one of the requirements of REST is that it should be stateless. And of course, so we do not have any false options out here. So your answer is none of the above. Now we have a number of tools that are available to us in order to create a GraphQL server. So these GraphQL servers would essentially implement those resolvers which can go ahead and resolve a certain query for us. Now, any of those names that you've heard of? So I'm sure in the tutorial, if you've gone through this um, slide and the stuff that's provided, you would have heard about Apollo server. So apart from that, any of these names that look familiar as you try to?
First option.
Yes, so good. Express GraphQL also helps in setting up a GraphQL server. And Prisma is
Ma'am,
also one more. Yeah.
yeah, ma'am, I was asking like Prisma is an ORM, right? Like it sits between the database and your application because I use it personally, apart from the course.
Okay.
So
Prisma,
yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
Prisma also, I think we are able to create, it does help to kind of like create a GraphQL server as well.
Because like for first time I am hearing about like I think it just translates the query into such thing instead of acting as a server. Like what I want to say is that you cannot for Apollo and Express GraphQL, you can use a third party use client which is not using Prisma like which does not have any relation between them, and you can just hit on an endpoint and get the data, right? Like you can use Postman to get GraphQL data from Express and Apollo. Am I
No,
correct
that
there?
is what Altair is. Okay, so the way that you're talking about that is what Altair does. But if I know, I think Prisma is able to. Okay, Prisma probably might have to look at it again. Okay, the Prisma part probably I'll have a look and get back on it. Altair is certainly it kind of like helps you query back to the server. Okay, the Prisma one, I'm not entirely sure.
Same here, because I use Prisma as an ORM, and from the website, it's written that for GraphQL, it's written that Prisma is an ORM that is used inside of GraphQL resolvers to query a database. I don't know, I'm not sure, so just I wanted to confirm, because I have never used it as a GraphQL thing. I have used it to connect to PlanetScale and other database, never as a
Yeah,
GraphQL.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, probably we'll get back to you on it. Okay, so Altair is certainly not one. It kind of like helps us to connect to a GraphQL server. Prisma, okay, we'll have a look at the same and probably we'll post it back. Okay, now let's have a look at our final question. Which of the following statement is true for GraphQL? So GraphQL allows a type system to describe the schema for backend data. GraphQL has multiple entry points. GraphQL can work only with Flask servers. GraphQL resolvers help resolve queries in any programming language. So which of these are the correct statements?
A and D.
Yeah. So yeah, so it allows us to have a type system, right? So something like we can say, I mean, mention our entities and the types associated with that, and then have a query along or with it. And of course, GraphQL does not have multiple entry points. So, I mean, essentially the way that it looks at it is that a flat graph kind of structure, and we should be able to navigate from one point to another without all those multiple endpoints. And as we know, GraphQL is quite versatile and it can be used in many programming languages, and it's just not kind of like fixed to our Flask servers. Okay, so yeah, as you said,
Yes, ma'am. Also, I want to add, like here, the Prisma can be only used with JavaScript and TypeScript. Like it cannot be used with Python and Java and other kind of language. So that was like why I am asking about.
it's only with JavaScript you're saying, is it?
Yes, ma'am. It's JavaScript and TypeScript. It can also be used with Dino, but it cannot be used with Python and Java and other like Ruby, Rust, all other languages. That's why.
Okay. Okay, probably we'll have to look into this. Okay, so we'll just have a look at this Prisma, whether it's suitable for all programming languages and whether it's able to serve the server side thing or not. So thanks for pointing that out.
Like if you
Okay.
open their website, then their main the heading title is next generation Node.js and TypeScript ORM. So like they make it very clear that what it is.
Okay, we'll get back to you on this one.
Oh,
Okay.
okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Prisma, okay, Prisma 650, that is it. Okay, now coming to JAMstack. Okay, JAMstack. So, how many of you have heard of JAMstack?
I have heard of that.
Okay, so can you just try to elaborate what is JAMstack and uh, why is it, yeah, kind of like the new buzzword announced?
Yeah, it stands for JavaScript API markup.
Great.
It's something like API independent, something on the architecture side of thing. It targets how we should build an app rather than targeting what should we use to build an app.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, as you just pointed out, right? It stands for our JavaScript APIs and markup stack. So, where can we essentially use it, or which are the kinds of applications in which we might find it useful to have such a kind of framework or implementation in place? Is probably where we have a content and we are not so much dependent on the server. Um, and of course, those are the scenarios where I mean, and we just have to kind of like go ahead and display that content. That's where this Jamstack really becomes helpful, right? Now, all of these terms stand alone as we see, right? So these have been in the market for quite a long time. Your JavaScript, your APIs, the whole thing about APIs, the whole thing about markup language. Did I leave anything in between, by the way? Okay, I did leave something. 8.4. Okay, we'll come to that after this. Um, this is where it kind of like none of these technologies are new as such, but the Jamstock term or the usage of it is what we are seeing is kind of like very much in the buzzword which we are hearing now. So why so? It's probably because of those evolutions of technology, right? I mean, to kind of like go serverless or to kind of like delegate the server part of it to a third party, which can take part of it. We don't have to kind of like take care of the server side of things. And at the same time, we have so many tools available these days, which is able to kind of like strip out the static part of our code and all. Now, how does it work out, right? So essentially, we need to kind of like what Jamstack essentially claims that they can be really faster and they can be a lot more secure as well, right? And of course, less expensive, as they say. Now, why all these terms are coming into picture over here? Now, with Jamstack, you can kind of like think of having your application front end, yeah, only the static content of your application front end to be hosted on a CDN kind of thing, right? So that is where the fastness of it comes into picture. So, and of course, there are a lot of tools available which helps to kind of like for to you to separate out that static content and the dynamic content. Like for Vue.js, I think we have what's that for Vue.js? I forgot the name. Next is it? Okay, so we have a few kind of like tools available which does that job for us, which kind of like separates out the static content and the dynamic content, and we can kind of like just go ahead and host these on CDNs. And of course, then kind of like the server part of it, it can be taken care of by third parties. So your application essentially, at least you don't have to take care of like how to that's where your server part comes in, right? You don't have to take care of that. All that you need to do is your application has to make a few requests to the server. So that's the picture, and of course your markup is the HTML part, which has been there for a long time, right? So I hope that makes sense. So which of the following statement is false regarding JAMstack?
uh, the high performance stability part, because first one is true because we saw in the first question, and the third one.
Yeah, the third one is something we do not guarantee, because I mean it all depends on the application, right? So if we have an application which does require a dedicated server, then it's best to go with the approach that does have a dedicated server. So Jamstack is more suitable for kind of a situation wherein we just have a storage logic and presentation kind of application. That's where I mean the Jamstack fits in perfectly, and we can kind of like go ahead and try to put our application into a Jamstack kind of architecture. And of course, which of them are false? I think it should be none of these, right? Or the third one. And of course, it doesn't kind of like guarantee us high performance essentially. As you said, I mean, it depends on what is it that we are trying to create, what is the whole purpose of our app. Okay. And yeah, now finally, which of the following is not a static site generator?
Pandoc, because it uses latex.
Yeah, Pandoc, right? So Pandoc essentially it helps us. It's kind of like converting between formats. Okay, and the rest of them are static site generators for us.
I have used Pandoc with latex, the converting latex nodes into HTML and PDF.
Yeah, so apart from that, I believe it does really have a wide range, and it does help us converting from one format to another format. So apart from that, yeah, so the rest of them are static site generators. Okay, yeah, now coming to a final question out here. So which of the following
First
statements is true about Jamstack?
first
Ma'am,
one.
Yes.
ma'am, we just like in the questions, in the third question, we negated about high performance and security.
Yep.
But here, the faster and more secure one also be false, right?
Okay, now in the third question, we said about high performance and stability of the application. Okay, so high performance essentially, we're not talking in terms of fastness, but if you are using your application on a Jamstack rather than in a regular array, or of course the profile that fits in, right? Something in which we have storage logic and presentation kind of thing in our application. Over there, you would find that of course your application is going to be faster. Okay. Um, but yeah, secure, we cannot essentially say that whether it's going to be totally secure or not. Okay. Because again, it depends on the third party thing. So that's what they try to get into consideration when it comes to the security part. That we don't have to take the headache of the security. A third party who is more specialized in doing the thing does the job for us. So what was your question essentially?
No,
Is
my
this true or
question
false?
was that the answer is true. Means if you check the answer, then it is marked as true about Jamstack.
This
But
one is it?
yeah, this is marked as true. 1, 2, 1, 3, and 4 is marked as true.
Okay, so did you get the idea why it's marked as true? If you're looking at an application which is already hosted as a JAMstack application, so what are we saying? That okay, your our server side of the job is kind of like delegated to a third party who are much more, I mean, they just look into the server side of it, the maintenance of it, and all that. And I mean, we tend to think that it's going to be more secure. So in that respect, the security comes in. That your application as such doesn't have to look into the security of your backend and stuff.
Yeah, I get it why it's secure because mostly it's static and sitting on the CDN where no one can like manipulate anything.
Yeah,
But
but of
I
course
only
we
have
will have some JavaScript part to it, which as and when required will make a call to your third party API kind of thing.
yeah, ma'am, I get about that. I was
Hmm.
asking like why we are not like telling that high performance part is true, but we are telling faster is means why high performance part is false, but faster is true. Like what faster means like what we will able to access the files more quickly, the latency will be low, or faster means that we
Yeah,
will able
latency will
to.
be low. Latency will be low.
Then what does high performance means? Because we
Okay.
can obviously serve more files, more static files from the server than
No, see,
having
okay,
a.
here the question is slightly around, do you think every application will be a good case scenario if each and every application, if you put it into a Jamstack, is it going to give you a high performance?
No, ma'am. But the thing is this. Let's say let's negate that. Let's only talk about the applications that are suited for Jamstack.
Okay.
Now, if we talk in that context, then why is high performance part wrong? Because see, if we are using the server side implementation, then it will be obviously slow in both terms. It will have more latency. It will have less numbers of users per server. It will also take more time for user inputs versus the Jamstack part where the thing is client side. So we can obviously see very quick action updates that the particular client makes. We can serve more files. We can also use thin servers that was taught in week 7 because we just have to serve an API. So why is high performance part false? Like I don't get it because in every aspect, high performance part of Jamstack is true because it's sitting in the CDN. So CDN is everywhere. So you will always get lower latency when your application is sitting in 192 countries versus 1, 2, or 5 countries. You will always get very less latency and very more performance if your application is client side. You will also serve more users for less money. So why it's not high performance? Because
Okay.
in the fifth question we are marking it as faster as true. So what does faster means? Like if faster means less latency, then you will only get that with Jamstack, no other thing.
What, um, okay, Abhishek or Narendra, do you want to throw light on this? Because what I think we are asking over here is with respect to any and every application, right? Does it
Sure. Okay.
guarantee a high
Yeah.
performance and stability?
Yeah. Let me try to answer. So, sorry, I forgot the name. I guess Himanshu. Yeah. So here the option suggests that it guarantees. Right? You cannot make a guarantee that if you are using a JAM architecture, then your application will work efficiently. Doesn't matter what situations your application is going. You cannot make a guarantee. Right? There might be a point when there are the number of users, they suddenly exceed from what you would have expected. In that case, your application can also go down.
Yeah, so we are just pending on that guarantee, right? If we
Yeah,
remove
this
the guarantee
guarantees
and
correct. Yeah, in general, that would be a true option.
okay,
But the
so we are
moment you
that like
put guarantees keyword here, or you can say a must keyword, this option becomes wrong.
okay, so it was like something ambiguous for me because we are just contradicting ourselves in two questions. That's why.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, because in option, of course, we are saying that Jamstack is highly reliable. But of course, there might be some things that can happen suddenly, and we couldn't have thought about those earlier. Of course, that could bring your application down.
Yeah, so I mean, we
Uh,
shouldn't think of JAMstack where it's a server-intensive application. So in those situations, we shouldn't even think of a JAMstack or kind of trying to shift it to a JAMstack framework. Okay.
okay, ma'am.
Okay. So yeah, so we're done with this, I guess. Now we can move on to one portion I left
Point
earlier.
four, 8.4.
Yeah. Yeah. So it revolves all around markup. So the most popular markup language, as we know today, is HTML, right? So what are the points you think is contributing for the same?
It's definitely not difficult to use, so that's the wrong option.
Yeah. So of course, HTML has been there around for quite a long time, and what we see is that it has been able to adapt, right, to new functional requirements and all. And of course, it is extensible, right, to other web components and new tags, just the way like the JS enable tags and stuff. And at the same time, we do also have the option to just kind of like concentrate on the semantics, and the styling can be totally separated out to a CSS file. So all these three would actually what makes our HTML quite popular. Okay, now coming to our next one. Which of the following statement is considered true for markdown language?
I will say all because we use inline markers like hash and star star.
Yeah,
We
okay.
also can read directly markdown. So, and it's already using readme in GitHub and like blog. You all get direct markdown to Jamstack blogs.
Yes.
What about the
So
instant texting part? Where do we use that?
which one?
Like in which application we see markdown used for instant texting? Like Briscoes is one, I think so. But that's not instant texting, right? The third option, last and second last one.
Um, okay. I think for instant texting, some small instant texting applications which we have, like
Like I can think of an example. Like we use Discourse, but that's in forum, not in instant texting. Like WhatsApp, we don't use. iMessage, we don't use.
yeah,
Facebook, we don't use. Twitter, we don't. Like they don't even allow an option to use. So
Hey, the Google Chat is the option. You can use Markdown there.
okay,
which one?
so I didn't know that.
So the Typora is, okay, it's taking a while to open. I thought I'll just show that, but it's taking a while to open. So Typora is an Markdown editor, right? And I mean, if we were just to kind of like compare it with HTML, so it's the ease of use, right? I mean, the ease with which you can kind of like go ahead and write something. It's kind of like great. We just give a hash, and it. I think this is a little slow for me today. Is it? Yeah, and you give double hash, you get something like, I mean, something that translates to our H1, H2 in HTML, right? And if we have to insert some kind of language option, uh, just give three, I think it was three tildes, and it allows us to kind of like enter any kind of a code kind of thing. And of course, you can go ahead and give your language option that you want to put in, and you go ahead and paste your code. So you get all those color codings and that good kind of effect. And as I said, to put a bullet point, you just give a star, and you give in some text and it takes it as a bullet. So all these things, it kind of like makes it really easy to use when we compare it with our regular HTML as well. Okay, so okay, so we are done with this as well. Okay, so we can move to our activity questions now. Practice questions, sorry. Okay, so having discussed all the things, so now let's just have a overlook at the practice questions. So choose the important aspects of web API design. So the use of HTTP standard, the use of standard conventions for listing, the representation of resources and required behaviors of clients, all the above.
Ma'am, the representation of resources part, that is only true when we are using RESTful APIs, right? Or it is true in general? I'm asking, I'm not sure about that. Like,
Yeah,
because,
so I
see,
mean, yeah.
yeah, in REST API only we consider everything as a resource. In Python and Flask, when we implement it, we extend the class of resource to, so I was asking.
So in general, yeah, I mean, when we are thinking of anything on our server side, we consider it as a resource, right? And the client kind of like tries to make a call it or just try to go ahead and change or modify anything for the resource. So I think it's a general way of thinking, representation of resource and the behavior of your clients.
What is your question? Hello.
Sir, I was asking that, like here in the third option, it is written that representation of resources. So when in the last term, sir was teaching us REST API and there are 6 rules. In that time, the sir taught as like the basic of REST API is viewing each API endpoint as a resource to get something.
No, resource is the data. Like
No, so I
data.
was asking that we view this only when we are using the REST APIs, or we view this as a general thing?
I think it should be like in context of REST API.
Okay, sir. So, sir, how like in exams, how should we know in which like we know here because due to the week we were taught REST and also we know in which context. But in exam, how should we know? Like it becomes very much ambiguous for us. Like I cannot differentiate like if this in graph in exams when we are asking for all 12 weeks, it becomes very ambiguous. Like I'm not telling you it's wrong or something. I'm happy to give the exam of this question, but it becomes ambiguous because like we cannot properly differentiate that the context in which the questions are asked. So if there is something regarding that.
I mean, the question is the important aspect of web API design. I mean, I don't find anything ambiguous here. What?
No, sir, I also didn't find anything ambiguous until you told me that this is the resources part is viewed in the context of REST API. So I was asking, like, do we always have to consider REST API as a base case?
Yeah, if we are talking about the resources, we are generally talking about the REST APIs.
Okay,
So
sir.
yeah, if you think about the application, we never say that this is the resource or something. If we are talking about the web application, we are just like rendering the HTML from the server.
Okay, okay.
And
So,
if
so in any exam, I should just consider like REST API as base case, and I should answer all the questions on that. Like, is this is my understanding from this?
so if we are talking about the representation of the resource, then I mean, most of the time it's the web API thing.
Okay. 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 So I get it. Like, if there is a web API, then there will be REST API.
Yeah.
Okay. So all of these will be the correct option.
Yeah. Okay, so which of the following languages GraphQL can be used with?
All the languages we saw in the third 8.3 last question.
So it can be, it's useful, it is compatible with almost all the languages. So which of the following statement is true regarding CMS, your content management system?
Like WordPress is a CMS, that one is correct.
First and third option.
Yeah, the first one also, it allows our user to create and manage online content. And yeah, so
Ma'am, can
yeah,
you
tell me.
clarify why user management part is not true? Like any CMS like WordPress or Ghost allows a user management.
The keyword is a must. Is it a must for all your CMS?
But okay, so but like no, I get it why it is true to false, but like I should be able, like if anyone can log in my CMS, then anyone can edit the resource. If it's on internet, if it's on localhost, then also anyone can edit. But like at least I should be at least there should be one limitation, right? That only authorized user can access the CMS.
Yeah, Himanshu. So right now I'm not able to recall the exact example, but yeah, there exists some CMS which doesn't allow the proper user management system. So here, user management means that you basically have a whole organization for different types of roles for different types of users. Let's say if you are working in an organization, the one person might be just working on the front end, how to basically render the data. The other person might be just working on the back end, how to populate the database in the back end. So you might assign different roles to certain peoples, and those peoples will have some permissions, and of course will have some roles assigned to them according to which they will work.
Okay, sir.
So all of the CMSs, they doesn't allow the user management. Yes, there might be a
So we are
few popular examples like you mentioned WordPress. It allows that, but yeah, there might be some which doesn't allow. I'm not able to
okay,
recall
sir.
the exact example. Maybe I'll
It's okay,
just
sir.
look through
It's
that again.
okay. So we are asking like a multi paradigm user management, right? Multi levels
Yeah, a proper
instead
user
of just
management
one.
means, of course, means you should have a proper definition of each user.
Okay, sir. So this is not related like only one. Like the admin should be able to log in, right?
So yeah, means if only admin is able to log in, you won't call it a user management.
Okay, sir. Okay. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Moving to our next question. Which of the following statement is true regarding REST API? So an API is
Uh,
used to decouple the front and back end. So is that a true or a
yeah,
false?
that's a true. Like it should. That's why we use an API for
Exactly.
separation of state.
Yes. An API is primarily built for and used by the end user. API defines multiple endpoints and or all of the above.
The API defines multiple endpoints is true. Ma'am, can you elaborate why build for and used by primary end user is wrong? I
Yeah,
get
of
it.
course. I guess
Like
we have already discussed it in the beginning of this session. We basically build APIs for the developers, for the front end developers, right? Who will utilize the endpoints of that API to populate the front end.
yes, sir. I was there at that time. Sir, I was asking like I am not talking about when the application is full blown with like everything done. I'm talking about primarily when the application is in the building phase. In the development phase, we do primarily define it for us, right?
Sorry, I again didn't get it. Means you say that the API is completed. Now it's only the front end part that is remaining, right?
No, I am telling that when the whole application is completed,
Hmm.
then the outside user will be able to use an API.
They
But
will be able
the
to, but why a backend developer will basically implement an API for the use of the users or for some other purpose? What's the primary
uh,
purpose behind implementing an API?
to be used by us, right?
To be used by us. So means us here is a end user of the application or what?
No, to be used by the developers who build the application.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you don't. Have you ever seen some application which, if I mean, which, let's say you are building some application which will be used by someone who doesn't know about the web development or something. So will you build any application? Will you build REST API or the application? You will not build the REST API for that kind of user.
Uh, I do get that, but that's not, according to me, that's not a good criteria. Because if I don't know web development today, I might know tomorrow.
But why will you want to expose
No, ma'am, I'm talking about the public part. Like api.github.com is a public one. Most people.
servers to the end user? I mean, for the developer who has, yeah,
No,
you were telling something.
I use api.github.com in Docker file to install the releases part. Like primarily, and not daily but weekly at least, so that I get the updates without having to download every time. So I am an end user, and I am using when I didn't know the programming part. So
Yeah, primarily written. So I guess the answer is like is correct. I don't know. There is not correct. There is not a like clear what you say. I mean, there is no clear definition in web development. So if you see the JSON is something like which a user. I mean, if someone doesn't know the programming, he can also read, and the program can also read the JSON.
right, sir, but
Yeah.
it's not about format, right? So I get about JSON, but this is not about form. You
No,
can like it's
but most of the representation are like that, that the both the user and the machine can read that representation.
okay, sir. I would just like to add a last thing, and then I
Yeah.
will move on. Let's say you want to deploy, you want to deploy a Todoist app on Heroku,
Yeah.
and you are very new to this thing and you don't know. Let's say, like, I'm not taking you personally. Let's say someone want to deploy, and then I built the app. I built a Docker file, which the user can use to deploy on Heroku or anywhere, and he forks it from my GitHub. Now he will be able to use that API without knowing programming or anything. So if so, that is what I'm telling you. Like, the API point at that time was primarily built for him, right?
Whom are you considering the end user over here in your example when you say that you have developed something and you have put it on GitHub and then someone has forked it, right? When someone has forked it, that means, and obviously he wants to do some development on top of it, right? Or you're saying,
Yes. So end user means anyone who is illiterate in development, right?
yeah, so I mean, over here, the example is more from a application endpoint kind of like thing. So over here, when you look at this, let's say this app on which you're filling in your answers, are you exposed to any API directly?
No.
No, right? So this is what we are talking when we are talking of end user, the final consumer of the app. Okay, like our Ola, Uber, whatever we use on a daily basis, are we exposing any kind of API directly to the user?
Uh, no, ma'am. No, I get it. I fully get it. Why this option is not correct. But the thing is, this like there are like lots of applications where the APIs like the weather API this are used. That is also a thing. Let's say I don't know programming and I just copied this as example to
Yes,
see
so
what's
what
the
are they
weather.
giving you? They are saying that you take that API, they're showing you how the JSON is. Again, you can use that API somewhere in your application to get something more meaningful out of it, right? Like the weather API,
Yes.
as you suggested.
Yeah,
So
we are
we get a
not.
set of, yeah.
Yeah, we are not saying that you cannot read that representation. It's not that if you can read that representation, you will say that, I mean, that it is useful for the end user.
Okay. I will take that an answer. So, what I understand from this is that we are talking about the in general part of in general website, right?
Yes, I
That's
mean,
it.
this is
Okay.
how you can talk in web development. Otherwise, it's not like the mathematics that
No, I
everything is
get it. I get
clearly
it.
defined, and you will not be frame any question if you start taking the like the sentences very literally.
Okay,
I
and
know.
that weather app,
Yeah.
as you suggested, it's a third-party API, right? So it says that, okay, I am maintaining, I'll get the backend for you. You can use that API in your application. You're free to use that API in your application and build an app out of it.
Uh, Ma'am, weather API, the weather API part isn't data provider. It's giving API as a means to use that data. It's not an API provider. I'm sorry, but this is what I get from that thing. That the weather company's main part is collecting the data. So let's say I'm a very big company and I want data for all the thing that I can directly get them to have a database. That is what I get. Like I may be wrong. I might be wrong. I am wrong. Like
No,
I
it's
don't
not
care.
about right or wrong. It's about, I mean, how will you? I mean, you can start arguing about every question if you will start arguing like this, that I
Oh,
can
sir,
read the
I'm not.
JSON, so it's not for the. I mean, this option is wrong. This option is right. And
I'm not arguing, sir. I'm sorry if you feel like that.
no,
Like I
no,
am really. I
I'm
have
not
no
saying that.
intention of doing that.
No, I'm not
Yeah,
No,
saying
I
it's
that.
get.
only that we're just trying to explain you the way you can differentiate it. Like Arogya Setu and all, they also expose a lot of APIs. So that, I mean, as a developer, you are free to go and kind of like pick out those, use those endpoints, try to use it in your application and make a meaningful application out of the same, right? So, uh,
Okay, I get it. I think we should like move on. I was just inquiring about from an exam point of perspective because like most time in exams, I think this option is right, and like sometimes it comes out as wrong. So
okay, yeah.
I,
Probably
I,
what you
I
can
get
keep
it.
in
Like I
mind
got
is a total full-fledged application kind of thing you can think, and you have to think whether do we expose any APIs to the users in a
okay. I get it. I will try to think like in general examples of things rather than
Yeah,
having the specific.
don't take it exactly literal. Otherwise, I mean, it will be very hard job for us to create questions.
No, sir. I certainly don't want to do that. Like
okay now.
this, I am talking because no one is else is talking. Otherwise, I generally keep quiet during these meetings.
No, it's good to have an interactive session. It's always good to have an interactive session, and yeah, any doubts in mind should always get cleared.
Okay, thank you.
So, which of the following statement is true regarding RESTful APIs?
The
So, do we
first
have a
option
single
is because that is like one of the defining principles.
yeah. Yes. Then Endpoint in an API cannot perform a write operation.
No, that's wrong because we use post and put.
Perfect. Now, an endpoint in an API can just be meant for read-only operations.
Yes, ma'am. True.
Ma'am, I'm sorry about this, but can you please also elaborate on this? Like, I will not ask another question on this. I just want you to
No, you
I
elaborate.
can
mean,
ask
you
questions.
can ask question. Why are you like acting like this?
No, no,
Uh,
it will just drag on unnecessarily. No, I like, see, the thing is this, if all I like, I will tell you what I get from this option. I get that we are asking about the get operation, like just copying the API endpoint and pasting it in the browser. And that's what we are asking here. If that is a thing, then it is correct. But like we can specifically make an endpoint for the post operation. That's why I will not ask any more anything on this. I just want you to explain it and then I can move on.
No, they're just saying that can there be an endpoint which can just be meant for read-only operations? Like if it's not having
Okay,
any other associated methods with it.
okay, yes, like there can be.
Yeah. Okay. So now moving on to our next question. Which of the following statement is false in the context of REST? So the get method should not trigger a write operation on the database. The post method should not trigger a write operation on the database. The HTTP delete method should be safe, and the HTTP patch method requests are not cacheable. So which are false? Okay. So the question is about false.
Yes, ma'am. Second and third, ma'am.
Yeah. So post is we can write with the post operation, and delete operations are not considered to be not a safe method because we can delete up and change the database as such. Okay, now the next one. Which of the following can be considered the best practices for defining the endpoints in REST API? So again, these are kind of
Ma-
like, yeah, just good practices. Okay, so no hard and fast rules over here, just best practices.
yeah, can we like I can ask one doubt on this last question.
Yeah, sure.
Like in my last Viva, though I got 22, like I got full marks, like 24 on 24. There was a question that the interviewer asked me about the patch, and I was like not able to say that in these terms. So I want to ask, why should we use patch instead of put instead of patch instead of put? Why should we use put instead patch instead of put? Sorry. Like, do you get it? Why what I am trying to say?
yeah,
When
yes,
to use what?
yeah, you are
Why
Uh,
saying
should we?
patch is
okay.
used to like uh, mm, what do you say, partial correction in the resource. When partial correction means partial in, modification. Partial
Okay, so it should
modification means
not be used to create new resources, right?
yeah, it should not be used. Yeah, that I can say.
Yeah,
It
it should
cannot
not be.
be.
One example that I can give you right now is suppose, uh, let's say you have an entity called user and you have certain properties that you are maintaining against each user. And let's say one of those properties are hobbies that is basically an array. And now what you want to do is you just want to, let's say, add a property in that array or maybe delete a property from that array. In that case, of course, you can do a put request in, of course, you are means updating that resource in some way, but you are not updating that resource entirely. You just want to update a part of it. You want to do some incremental changes in it. So in that case, a patch method would be preferable.
Sir, then why not post? Like, put is used to
Yeah, of
like
course. I
what?
said means you can use put as well. Definitely. So it's all about conventions again.
Yeah,
Okay,
Post and put
like
are generally used when you, so of course, post has a different purpose. If we talk about conventions, if something doesn't exist, it usually creates it on the server or on the database. Well, put in some cases it can create as well if the resource doesn't even exist. but it is mainly used to basically update the entire resource.
Also used to upload data, right?
Yeah, of course, you can do that as well.
Okay. 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 So, sir, can you tell me like good practices about when to use patch? I've never used it
Yeah,
before.
I just told you. I just told you when you want to just make incremental changes and not the changes means entirely for the object, for the entire
Okay.
object. Just want to
Okay.
change a
Editing
small
user
part of it.
profile, will that act as an example? Editing user profile.
Yeah, of course, means I just gave an example. Let's say you are storing hobbies for a user and you want to just, let's say, append one more hobby or delete one hobby from that hobbies list, that you are maintaining. In that case, patch would be more preferable.
Okay. There is we can use fetch like in patch thing, right?
Sorry.
We can use fetch API to do patch, like
Yeah, yeah.
confusing words. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, see, this is also about the convention. All these get, push, put, post, all these methods. I mean, when should we use it, and when can we use it? These are the two different questions. If you'll ask when can we use it, then you can. I mean, even you can use get request to delete resource, and nobody will throw an error. But should we do it? I mean, no. The answer is no, because if someone is sending a get request, he is expecting that I will get some resource. And let's say if you have implemented like that, it will delete a resource, and that's not a good practice.
Okay, sir. I just had this question because like put patch was not even in the notes during the last term when we were taught REST APIs. Like I thought it wasn't just unnecessary option in to use. That's why. We can move on to the next question, ma'am.
Yeah. So yes, anyone wants to answer question 7?
The delete op. No, no. Uh,
So when we are defining endpoints, what are the things that we should keep in mind, or what's the best practice kind of thing?
Ma'am, B option.
Okay.
Ma'am, B option.
B option, is it? Okay. Yeah. Appropriate HTTP status code should be used. Yeah. Anything else? So yeah, what we mostly use is JSON format, so certainly not C, or documentation will not list the available endpoints. It's always good to have documentation. So option A is also one, right? So when you are kind of like defining your endpoints, it's a good practice to use nouns instead of verbs, in the sense like it should be more like natural English or a natural sentence as such. Okay, so we should avoid using verbs like get, post, and all that. Instead, it should be having just proper noun kind of things, like the entities, things like URL slash student slash whatever. You get the point, A, right?
uh, yes,
Again,
ma'am.
it can be done.
No,
Okay, so it's
you
not
can
going to
continue.
throw you a error. Programmatically, it's not going to throw you error, but just as good practices.
We also use the verb to refer as the post and get like words, right?
Yes, yes.
So this is different from that, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're talking about the endpoints.
Okay, the URL naming thing, right? Means
Yes.
okay, okay.
Okay. So it's not talking about the method that you use inside while sending your API, the HTTP request. Okay, now coming to the final question, which of them is false regarding permalinks? So option A, what do you think? Permanent link is a permanent link which is not expected to change throughout the life of the resource. Is it true or false?
It's true.
It's
Perfect, that's
true.
true. And that's the whole idea about it. Next is the permanent link is always human readable. Is it always?
No, no.
False.
No. So that is the false option that we have over here. And of course, the rest too, right? So a permalink can be used to identify resource uniquely. So that's the whole purpose of it. And of course, a Google Doc is a good example, right? So whenever we create a doc, you would have seen that huge kind of access link that comes up, and which is usually hard to remember and of course hard to use. Okay, so I think that's the end of it.
Ma'am, if we edit the Google Doc, is that a violation of permalink? Like you will find different resource at the same URL.
It doesn't change, right? So that's the whole thing. Whenever you create a doc, as long as your doc is existing,
Let's say I
it
create
would
a doc for tables, okay,
yeah.
1 to 10, and then you saw it today, and then after like some days later I change it to alphabets. Then when you will go again there, you will find it changed. So
The link remains the same, right? Editing your doc wouldn't change the access link of that.
okay, so it's the link part, right? That like I can update an image and whatever I want, but the link should be same.
Yeah, so the link would still remain the same. Your doc is created, it's created with that permanent link. So if you're changing the content within it, it wouldn't change the link.
Okay,
Okay,
ma'am.
and that link is kind of like you can bookmark it, you can get back to the link. It's not associated with the content within the link.
Okay.
So as long as the resource is there, you should kind of like have it. Okay, so that's all that I have for today. So any questions?
Ma'am, can we like can you clarify on that Prisma thing?
Which quiz marking?
Uh, Prisma thing, right? That the thing we left in 8.3 or 8.2 something about Prisma as ORM for GraphQL server.
Okay, the Prisma link. Okay, the Prisma. Wait, let
I'm
me
not
just have a
audible
look
or
at.
what?
You are audible. I'm not audible.
You are audible.
No, no,
Yeah,
you
both
are.
are audible. Yeah.
Okay, I thought like there was some error in. Like the URL for that Prisma
The
is
Prisma.
at prisma.io. So if you go there, then like, that is where the Prisma.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm just having a look at it. Okay, it looks to be more of a client side thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get
Like
that
that.
rectified. We'll get that rectified.
So that option is not correct, right?
Yeah, Prisma shouldn't be an option.
Okay. Yeah. Uh, Also, Naren sir, can you like clarify about that GraphQL computing expenses thing? Like, if you want, like that's not a
No,
something
no.
necessary.
I'll answer your question, but in sake session you didn't give me chance to read that document.
Uh, Okay, sir.
Okay, I was going through it, but I could not complete.
Yeah, it's very long. Like I read
Yeah.
around 6 months ago. So. Like I just remembered while we were discussing GraphQL. My understanding is that it's also server like anything else, right? So why
Uh,
should it have so much cost to it?
but
Like we should.
but
Yeah,
but
yeah. So continue, please.
yeah, till I mean I have read like 1/4 of the document, and as far as I could understand, they are also talking about the cost in terms of resources.
Yeah. That's what I'm trying to say, that we should move on to better technologies with like the reduce the server cost and the resources used and all of that, right? So
Yeah.
let's say we are having using something which just benefits us in at one dimension rather than a multi-dimensional thing, then we should come up with something good, right?
Yeah.
Like they said that they were able to reduce the cost, but it was still relatively high.
Yes.
So I think this should be used only like when you have a very large user base, right? Not for like medium to small applications.
Yeah, and they were like talking about a lot of uh, things. They were saying that the cache was expired and this kind of things, that the spike in the users, there was a spike on the user. I don't know. I'll have
Yeah,
to go through all the document, complete
yeah.
document.
So if you like just directly jump to the last paragraph, they like give the update on what happened after they were able to optimize it and all.
Huh?
So there also you can see that it was high at that optimized point also. So I will definitely ask you this in next session.
Okay, okay.
Okay. So this session ends right here, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm there. So sir, I'll ask like it's not something of this course. Do you think that the bonus marks is doing like here people are just like keeping their mobiles on to get the marks, not attending the session. So that didn't like quite.
Yeah, but interactions has increased.
Okay.
I mean, in this session, you are the only one who are talking, but in a lot of sessions, people interact.
No, I have like taken Java also. In that also, like I don't usually talk because like it goes on and on.
Yeah.
So like no means like if I talk, then like I get my doubts clear, right? Because if I have a doubt, I go on the internet and I found for most of the things.
Yeah.
I asked today because no one was listening, and I think this is like with several other sessions too. I think MLF is the one that I am part of that is filled with users. Like it's more than 100 users at every session.
Yeah.
Other than that, like programming thing, this is only happening. Like Java also, when Ankur's Java also same system commands. At most, like you will get this same. Like there would be participants, but no one would be talking.
Yeah, but we are optimistic that people will interact.
Like I would also like I don't
Yeah,
like
I understand what you are trying to say, but I think
maybe next time.
we are
So we
optimistic.
will
Yeah,
this bonus marks thing continue,
yeah.
or it is for this term only?
And people were not taking part in live sessions, so
Yeah, no. So I am asking like, will this thing continue for next session, next term too?
this 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 I cannot answer.
Okay. Like I think it's a pilot thing, right? So I don't think so. Like that's a pretty much 60 marks margin. So like it will have a huge impact on grades definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, Binoy. Like I'm not
Yeah, the
personally
only
attacking
the
someone.
only
Okay.
answer right now I can give that we are optimistic that people will interact.
Yeah, no, I'm responding to Binoy. Like he messaged. So I'm not like personally attacking to someone. Okay.
No,
I
no,
was
don't
just
worry.
no that like one student like messaged. His name is Binoy something. So sorry, if you felt something. Like I'm not talking to you, sir. I'm talking to. Like I will respond in chat. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Well, yeah, means since we have already started these things,
So,
just a generic question. How's the
yeah.
course going in general? How are you finding it?
So I'm finding it very good, sir. So if I can ask one more extra stupid question, why didn't we use Svelte?
Sorry,
Why didn't we use Svelte instead of Vue? Like I think Svelte is personally beautiful.
I'm not
Well,
able to completely understand what you are saying.
like why did we use Vue as a framework instead of Svelte?
I
Yeah,
guess that was already answered in the first set of lectures. Yes, where
Yeah,
Professor
yeah, I
Nitin
was there,
himself.
but yeah, like I'm asking you, like I think Svelte is like I think Svelte is like Rust. Okay, it will get famous at like some point of time.
Probably. Again, we cannot guarantee anything. But yeah, when this course was formulated, so there were many frameworks that were discussed during that time. But of
Okay.
course, it's few that we are learning here, because there would be some advantages that it gives or that it carries. That's why we are discussing these days it here.
Yeah, no, I'm not asking like the thing why. Like I get it. Everyone has to be satisfied with the choice. Like I personally think that like we should have used Svelte. Svelte is like more like it's very beautiful to write. Like it doesn't clutter us the HTML thing, and it's also fast. So also like to answer your question, the thing is this that it's like before Mad1 I was not into very much like in the front end thing. I was in the back end but not in the front end. But after Mad1 and like during the Mad2, like I am like comfortably into the front end thing. I can make small things on my own. uh, like that's what I can tell you, because the theory part is like I don't think it does have like more weight than the practical thing, right?
yeah,
Uh,
correct.
so I am able to make like I'm very comfortable with it. So I think so. Like this is very awesome thing, right? That you all choose a production thing like which can be really useful instead
Yeah.
of just like having it as a recap. I also think that system command source is very good too. Like that is what we are like discussing it. Thank you for this session, sir.
Thanks for the coming.
Yeah, is there any feedback from others?
Are you still talking to me?
Yeah, means I guess you are already done giving your feedback. Yeah, we are asking probably from the other participants who are there in this call.
Someone said nice course, sir.
Okay.
So, sir, I will take a leave. Okay. Thank you for the course. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, sure. I hope we'll see you in the next sessions as well. Okay, looks like he left. Yeah. Okay, so are there any questions, or means we shall be closing this session? Okay, looks like there aren't any. I guess we can close the session. Yeah, Sanjita, will that be okay, right?
Yes, I think we're done. Thank you all for joining.
Yeah, thank you all for joining in the session. Thanks.